Chapter 2. The Morning After. Alson ordered dinner up to his room. He wasn't eager to be around people this evening, especially if he were recognized as his father's son after the wake. There had been a number of media drones silently hovering over the proceedings, and it was no stretch of the imagination that at least one of them had been focused on the three siblings at the bar. As he waited, he pulled up his itinerary on his handheld and canceled the return ferry. Then he pulled up a blank message to his neighbor back home. He wasn't particularly close to any of the people in the small mountain village he enjoyed the solitude of, but the old woman had been kind to him, and, he expected, had adopted him in her own way. She made sure that he was fed occasionally, and never failed to bother him about the lack of womanly touch in his house. He shook off that train of thought and took down a short but friendly message to her to please make sure that the water and heat was turned off before the onset of winter. He wouldn't be back before the spring at any rate. Once his meal was finished, and the flatware shuttled back to the kitchens, Alson placed the case aside on the small hotel desk and set the crystal gingerly on the included felt pad. He had read about these when they were first gifted to humanity. They were quite rare, even in the circles that his father had run in. What he did know was that you shouldn't handle them with bare hands overmuch. The imprinting process was generally tuned to the recipient's genetics, and even a light, bare-skin touch could be enough to set off a cascade of memories flowing into the mind of the bearer. It wasn't dangerous, physically, but emotionally it could be overwhelming if you weren't prepared. He thought of his sister gently cradling her crystal back in the armchair in the suite, her suite. Perhaps she was still there, tears streaking down her face as she relived her father's memories of his courtship of their mother and early diplomatic career. She had always been more emotionally sensitive than the two brothers, though she called it maturity. And he imagined that she would have a particularly hard time experiencing the memories of the births of the three siblings and their early life from their father's point of view. He would check in on her in the morning. If he knew his brother at all, he was likely already headed back to the ferry port on his way home. Emotionally stunted wasn't a fair assessment of Ehrenfeld, but it did appear that way to others. Alson and Hildy knew that he could be just as passionate and emotional as the two of them, but he was an expert at keeping his feelings inside, even if their mother had been concerned about an eventual breakdown later in his life. Her passing had been particularly hard on Ehrenfeld 10 years ago. He had become increasingly distant and involved in his career then, and hadn't made any efforts to contact him, or Hildy, as far as he knew, for years after. In many ways, the passing of their mother had been what truly broke the family apart. She had been the cement that bound them together. Her upbringing in a small town, much like where Alson had made his own current home, had instilled in her a deep sense of family and community. He knew at some level that she felt she had failed the three of them in not being able to pass that on to them. But for all of the times she had ridden them about grandchildren, she seemed resigned to the fact that she would not have any by the end. She had devoted herself fully to their father and his work among the Manisae, and had lived in the home that Alson had just inherited, but had never been to. When the aneurysm took her from them, she and their father had been on a tour of Earth, so her own wake had been there in the family home in Wien. It hadn't been as grand as their father's, but much more emotionally. The ambassador had distanced himself from his children after that. Hildy claimed that he sent her occasional messages, but as far as Alson assumed, their father had taken to his work in much the way Ehrenfeld had at the same time, and for the same reasons. He supposed that their resemblance didn't end at the physical. Alson was a self-styled observer of people. It suited him as a confirmed bachelor and introvert. He saw his father and both his brother and sister through their consummate devotion to their own lines of work, though his sister was the only one to inherit their mother's emotional maturity. Alson himself felt that he had inherited some unlikely combination of conflicting traits from both his father and mother, as is the case with most observers of others. Their inward focus lacks a certain sharpness. At least that's the way his personal theory concluded it. He brought himself back to the present from his trip down memory lane. The crystal still sat on the desk as he rested, hunched on the end of the bed in his small room. He rose slowly and went to the lavatory to wash his hands, then returned to the depression he had left in the foam mattress. Then, with the care that one might reserve for religious relic, he lifted the crystal from its felt into his hands expectantly. It took a moment for anything to happen, and he closed his eyes slowly to take in the memories as they flowed into his mind. Images of Tiras took hold in his inner eye, first of the approach to the planet as appeared in the past, Then, as the perspective approached to the surface, a deep stain of blue and green bloomed outward from the Manisae capital of Zelmas. The memory was very cinematic, as Alson experienced it. The years of carefully executed ecopoiesis fell away in moments. The image shifted to those of himself and his mother being ushered into their new home in the city. There were blurs of official functions and meandering walks among the former regolith fields. Then an image flashed in his mind of his father's study, just to be replaced with more random memories. The study flashed again, this time facing a shelf of statuettes and objects. The memories flowed faster now, interspersed with these flashes of the study, the shelf, and eventually a close study of one particular object on the shelf, a small Manisae obelisk gently engraved in swirling decorative patterns. The image lingered for a moment, then faded to black. Alson opened his eyes to a view of the ceiling in the hotel room. According to the clock on the wall opposite the bed, he had been in that position all night. His legs were numb from hanging over the bed. As consciousness eased into his mind and body, he realized that he was still holding the crystal, knuckles white as if trying to crush the object. Only when he eased his fingers off of it, the blood rushed back in his hands, and they cramped from the unexpected movement. Legs tingling as feeling returned to them, Alson hobbled to the lavatory to freshen up and relieve himself. When he looked in the mirror, his face was ragged and encrusted with snot and tear streaks from his eyes and nose to his ears. He hadn't known what to expect from the crystal, but appreciated his decision to be alone when experiencing his father's memories. In hindsight, Ehrenfeld must have known more than that, which explained his own hasty retreat into solitude. Alson couldn't even imagine his brother in the state he found himself in this morning. Over another room-serviced breakfast, memories of his father's life would occasionally pop up into his consciousness like whales coming up for air, unpredictable and explosive. It would take a while for them to integrate into his own, and then only with effort would Alson be able to separate them from his own. One thing that lingered was the image of the carved object on the study shelf. That memory alone seemed out of sequence in the whole experience, as if it had been purposefully inserted into the rest of them. It wasn't foreign, as he recognized the study as his father's from the other memories, but the frequency and resolution of the shelf and the statue stood out among the rest. Alson shook off the uneasy feeling of thinking someone else's thoughts and finished his breakfast. He had resolved to check in on his older sister that morning before making plans to move on from the station. Refreshed and dressed after his emotional evening, he arrived mid-morning at his sister's suite. Almost before knocking, she opened the door to him, face fresh and smiling. "Morgen, Bruderlein. Come in." Alson looked expectantly at his sister as they sat across from each other in the same chairs they had occupied the day before. "Ah, I expect you've passed through the eye of the storm, have you? And you're likely wondering how I fared as well." Alson nodded in confirmation. "I was a mess this morning. It took me full 5 minutes to clean my face off, and you can probably still see the bags under my eyes from it. I didn't expect it to be such an emotional undertaking." Hildy sighed. "I think I may have a bit of a leg up on you when it comes to these." She gestured to her crystal, now sitting back in place on the desk. "You know my field is analytical geochemistry, with a specialty in biosuperconductors. What do you think that means?" Realization dawned on Alson as he connected the term with the object. "Ah, so you know all about these then. I thought that you were being over-hasty when you grabbed it so readily yesterday. I guess you knew what you were doing." "That doesn't mean that I wasn't a mess as well, but I took my time with it, and I'd like to think that I'm a little more advanced when it comes to emotions than you and Ehrenfeld are. Plus, as a woman, I know a bit more about presenting myself confidently." Alson relaxed a little. He had never been able to win a debate with his sister, and had long since given up trying. "Do you have a way to make coffee in this place?" he asked. "You know how Father appreciated coffee. Of course there is. I'll go prepare one for you, though I doubt there's anything that will pass for milk up here, even if it were fresh." "Black is fine. I prefer it that way anyway." Alson may never have developed his father's taste for alcohol, but coffee was a different story. His and Hildy's late morning overflowed into the afternoon, and was filled with reminiscing and discussing how their own memories of their father compared to the ones that they had experienced from his point of view. It was wholly cathartic, and Alson left the suite feeling refreshed and closer to his sister than ever. As he made to leave, she said, "I know you're going there soon," referring to Tiras. "Be careful. It's not like here. There may be very few humans there, so you would do well to read up on Manisae customs and culture on your way. I don't know how much you'll glean from Father's memories, but you aren't him, and they won't see you that way either. And I'll stay here. I expected this gift from him, and have already prepared. You're always welcome if you decide to come back this way. She left it open-ended as he swung the door closed behind him.